My wife asked me tonight to keep it short, and I always try to do what she asks me to do. So just a few thoughts, but I want to begin with a reading from Sri Yukteswar in his book, The Holy Science, and just a quote from Jesus, really. This is at the conclusion of his book, The Holy Science, where he really attempts to show the underlying unity between the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and Kriya Yoga. And he begins the conclusion with a quote from a poet. Love rules the court, the camp, the grove, the men below and saints above. For love is heaven, and heaven is love. And then Sri Yukteswar gives this brief commentary. The power of love has been beautifully demonstrated by the poet in the stanza quoted above. It has been clearly demonstrated in the foregoing pages that love is God, not merely as the noblest sentiment of a poet, but as an aphorism of eternal truth. And the context of the quote from Jesus was the scribes and the Pharisees came to him to trick him. They wanted him to contradict the Torah, the law of Moses. So they asked him, what is the most important commandment? What is the commandment of all commandments? And Jesus gave them a very simple answer, but one of profound and absolute truth. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, your whole will, with your entire self. That's the first commandment, he said. And the second commandment is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as an extension of yourself. Someone asked me recently, what is God? And what does God have to do with Christmas? And I said, God is the highest good that we could possibly imagine. And then the person said, okay, it sounds good, but what is the highest good that we can possibly imagine? And I said, the highest good is the purest, the highest, the finest, the sweetest, the most powerful love you could ever imagine. That's the highest good. And that's God. And he said, okay, so what does that have to do with Christmas? And I said, well, what we believe, and it's also what Yogananda believed, that in Jesus, and Christians often have not lived this out well, but in Jesus, that love, that highest love that we can possibly imagine times infinity, that highest love became one of us. That highest, most powerful force, love, fully and totally, in a very explicit way, entered into the human condition, entered into human history, and entered into our personal histories. Not to condemn us, not to shame us, but to elevate us, to divinize us, to turn us into beings of love, so that we could be love bearers, not just for Christians, but for everyone. And that love is the light that we are celebrating tonight. Light is love, and love is light. But there's something we have to understand about love, because we have a lot of misunderstanding and misconceptions about love. We've reduced it to something sentimental, to something tame. We've domesticated love. C.S. Lewis said that God is wild. And if God is love and love is God, then guess what? Love has to be wild. And I don't mean wild in an impulsive sense. I don't mean wild in some kind of degenerate sense. Love is that wild force that seeks to transform life on planet Earth. But again, it's wild. So let me talk about the wildness of that love in the Christmas story. So you have this 15-year-old Jewish girl. An angel comes to her. It's wild. It's almost unbelievable. And says, "You are the chosen one. Hail Mary, full of grace. The Lord is with you. You are going to embody that love in the person of Jesus. Emmanuel, God with us, love with us. And you're going to teach him in the ways of love." Wild. And by the way, you're a virgin. And by the way, they might want to stone you and kill you because you're a virgin. Wild love. Love is wild, you see? And then there's Joseph. He had planned to marry Mary. He was betrothed to her. And when he found out that she was pregnant, he didn't know what to do. He was a good man, though. And according to the law at that time, as it was understood, she should have been stoned, but he wouldn't. He wouldn't let it happen. And then an angel appeared to him in the dream and said, "It's okay." Wild. So Jesus is born. And then an angel appears to Joseph again in a dream and says, "It ain't going to be very good for him around here. You need to go and take him to Egypt, to a foreign land, foreign people. But I'll be with you." Do you see the wildness in that? We've so tamed this story. It's wild. And even the three magi, traveling, following a star. By the way, Yogananda said that the magi were Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, and Sri Yukteswar in a previous life. But they were wild. They had to go on a journey to a foreign land. Wild. And then God shows up in this baby, not as a prince, not as a king, not as a ruler, not as a wealthy person. He wasn't an influencer, but as a helpless little baby. That's wild. But there was a logic to God's wildness, because we've all been burned and we're all afraid of love. We want love. We were born for love. We were made for love, but we're afraid of it. So in God's wildness, he said, "I'm going to come as a little infant, a little baby." Don't babies melt our hearts? That's what's God's wildness. I'll come as a helpless little baby, and they can't not love a helpless little baby. So what does that mean for us? Well, think about it. What we're doing tonight is a little bit wild. We think that lovingly remembering our loved ones, present and past, that somehow it's going to bless them. A materialistic scientist would say that's rubbish. But we're wild enough in our love to believe that it can cross the barrier of time and distance. That's what we're doing tonight. We're sending our love across the barrier of time and distance and death itself, believing that it will work. It will bless. That's wild. So if we're really going to get into the Christmas spirit, not just tonight, We have to be willing to be wild, not impulsive, not self-destructive. That's not what I'm talking about. But wild about love. As I said earlier, not to love feebly but fiercely. We have to be willing to gamble everything on love. Not sentiment, but love. In the world we're living in now, it takes wild love to have hope. It takes wild love to believe that somehow, in some way, the light is going to win. And we may not see it now, but that wild love creates that hope, and that hope sustains us in the midst of the darkness. We need to have wild love that expresses itself in faith, believing that the Spirit of God, that love of God, the same Spirit and the same love that conceived Jesus in the womb of Mary, that same love, have faith in that love so that we could conceive of the Christ consciousness in our lives. We have to have faith in that love, that it is the most powerful force in the world. Our love has to be wild enough that we're willing to live by the truth, to speak the truth to ourselves, and to speak the truth to others. And our love has to be wild enough to believe that God has a purpose for each one of us. That our life here is not just a cosmic roll of the dice. That there's a divine imprint in us and a divine calling in us. And that we make a difference. That we are light. And in the context of our own life, to bring that light into the world, to bring life into the world. Our love and faith in God has to be wild enough that we believe that God's love and God's Spirit is the wind at our backs, and every act of nobility and love and selflessness is being supported and guided and fueled by the love. And lastly, we have to be wild in our love, wild enough, as Jesus said, to pray for those who persecute us, to pray for our enemies, to love our enemies. Doesn't mean we become passive and let people walk all over us, but to seek the highest good of everyone who comes into our sphere of influence. I'm going to close with a quote from St. Bonaventure, who was a follower of St. Francis. In fact, when he was a little boy, he was sick, and they say that Francis healed him, and he became a Franciscan friar. And probably about 15 years after Francis died, he took over running the Franciscan order. It's a beautiful quote. Let holy desire enkindle your heart, for God is sweet. Let holy fervor raise you up, for God is beautiful. Let joy inebriate you, for God is the fullness of love. His love is full of power. That's our mission tonight. And it's our mission every day of our lives. It takes great faith in God's love to be joyful in the midst of darkness. But our joy is a gift to the world. The world needs joy.